Hello, welcome back. I'm Catzilla and this is where I talk about horror and all things horrifying to save my friends from my constant info dumping. So remember that one watch equals one free friend. Find some room in your hearts for them. Today I'm talking about one of my life's great loves, practical effects. We're talking about the horror movies that put the work in and physically created all of their special effects. So their gore, goo, monsters, death, all of it is physically created by a person without ever having to rely on a computer. Sometimes janky but admirable, other times terrifyingly convincing. Practical effects are so important to the shaping of the horror genre and are pretty much responsible for making me the breed of horror fan I am. They inform so much of what I specifically like about horror. I'm gonna be delving into this wonderful world and looking at different types of effects. I've got some categories going. A tasteful bit of CGI hating and a little recap, little showcase of some of my personal favorite instances of practical effects. If you're a guy who always sits watching movies thinking, how'd they do that then? You're in the right place, baby. You're home. Let's get into it. So one thing about practical effects in horror movies and in movies in general, they're kind of a dying breed. We don't really see much of them being used in movies getting made now. One reason for that is that they're very slow and very expensive to produce. You're gonna need a bunch of artists with a bunch of quality materials and to give them a bunch of time to go do their thing. And of course, in the current film industry where everything is so military operation streamlined, every single movie is like a little get rich quick scheme in itself with as little effort and as much profit as possible. It goes without saying, nobody's doing that. Honestly, I feel like digital effects are gonna become too much effort for the film industry soon. I think they're probably just gonna ask fucking Gemini to create a dinosaur or an explosion and be done with it. But yes, digital effects, so CGI, they can be completed quickly and easily on a computer. That's not to say a level of creativity isn't still involved in creating CGI effect. Like, it certainly requires a vision and a lot of brain power to make it look good, which it rarely ever does. But it for sure requires less savviness and like kind of spur of the moment creativity than creating some kind of wacky contraption to create that effect in real life. And also, if you feel the need to put CGI blood in your movie, jail. I feel like the film industry has resultantly really tried to gaslight us into thinking that CGI looks so much better. It is the marker of modernity and sophistication. Practical effects look cheesy and dated, which, when was that a bad thing? For example, the 2011 reboot of The Thing, when filming that movie, they really wanted to use all practical effects for it, as the original Thing is pretty much a masterclass in practical effects. It's kind of considered the gold standard for that kind of thing. And so they wanted to recapture that and honor that. And they were then forced by the studio to redo the whole thing with CGI, just because that's what people expect to see when they go to the movies now. I think a lot of the reason why we are so oversaturated with reboots and stuff now is because they're a chance to take those provenly beloved stories and improve them with CGI. I am definitely aware that in like dedicated horror nerd circles, it's very much the other way around. Practical effects are all the rage, while digital effects usually get clowned on a lot. And if you were to say in those circles that you prefer digital, you prefer CGI, you would probably get hunted down and killed. It's kind of like that video that was like, what if being gay was the norm and straight was the minority? That's kind of the vibe. But I do think for the average moviegoer, your average Joe, and like the people making these movies, that is very much the consensus being pushed forward. Obviously, practical effects were born out of necessity. No one had the option of handy computerized effects, so all filmmakers really ever had to rely on was movie magic to make their stuff look good and convincing. However, that necessity brought out so much ingenuity, from the manipulation of shadows and the heavy monster makeup of the 1920s to the latex and Caro syrup revolution of the 80s, filmmakers were putting crazy amounts of effort in, really thinking outside of the box about how to make their movie scary and visceral. And I just think it pays off perfectly. Something about these sets being so immersive for the actors, with all these crazy things really happening around them that they can interact with and they can see and smell and everything, makes it so immersive for the viewer as well. Even the campiest of bright tomato red blood still feels more grounded to me. It still feels more real because it is something real. It's something that was painstakingly crafted. And if those classic 80s Tom Savini campy monster flicks are still too cheesy, too dated for you, then the rare handful of modern movies that still use practical effects, they all look absolutely seamless and amazing as well. The Substance, an Oscar-nominated body horror film from 2024, that uses a whole bunch of practical effects to depict warping flesh and splitting, mutating skin, and people were absolutely disgusted by it. People were horrified in a good way. It looks perfect. That whole itchy, under the skin quality of The Substance, that's all down to practical effects, baby. So I thought of some different categories of practical effects. They're not definitive, it's just to kind of avoid word vomiting at you completely. I wonder if you can guess which of these is my favorite from how passionate the info dump becomes. So the first category I came up with is creatures. I feel like this is the oldest, most tried and true form of practical effects. It all goes back to the creature features, featuring the creature. You look back at the golden age of horror, golden age of cinema, and it's all about the monsters, quite literally, like the universal monsters. You know, where would we be as horror fans without Frankenstein's monster in his green grease paint and his stitches and bolts stuck to him with chewing gum? Good creature design is key to any monster movie. And in my opinion, it's really key that the monster is actually real, is actually there on set, creaturing about. One type we see is puppets or animatronics, usually operated either by the special effects team manually or by some kind of mechanism designed as part of the piece. Usually a combo of both. The most famous special effects animatronic puppets that probably come to mind are the 12-foot extensively choreographed puppet of Audrey 2 in Frank Oz's Little Shop of Horrors, or the shark in Jaws, Bruce. Bruce was created against all odds. He was created in spite of all the haters out there, all the cowards that said a giant to scale animatronic shark could not be made, that they should just use miniatures. Steven Spielberg, the director, was super adamant about not using miniatures specifically. He wanted it all to feel as real and tangible as physically possible. There were 3 different animatronics in total for the shark, each with different facial functions and movements, and they were all attached to a trolley under the ocean so that they could move back and forth. Also with hydraulics which could open and close their little sharky mouth. They did, however, sink and or wildly malfunction when placed in salt water. So the animatronics are actually barely used in the film. There's only a couple of shots using them. But Bruce is in there a little bit, okay? So put some respect on his name. You guys already know how I feel about the film Brain Damage, 1988, directed by Frank Henenlotter. It's about a guy, Brian, who acquires a wormy little brain parasite named Elmer. Elmer gives Brian these beautiful euphoric visions as a technique to distract him, while Elmer uses his body to kill people and eat their brains. Elmer himself is a silly, phallic looking little puppet who is often animated by stop motion in the film when he's like popping out of Brian's head and mouth and whatnot. The New Zealand movie Brain Dead, or Dead Alive, depending on where it was released. Directed by Peter Jackson. Yes, Peter Jackson of Lord of the Rings fame directed this thing. It's unofficially titled the bloodiest movie of all time, so I will definitely be circling back to it. But it also has a similar situation going on with its Sumatran rat monkey, or Simius raticus. It's the monkey carrying the undead virus that spreads through the town. It forms the basis of the whole film, and this gruesome little puppet is often seen stop motion animated into the Wellington Zoo. Clive Barker's Nightbreed 1990 is absolutely full of this stuff. It features a kind of underworld monster realm called Midian, which, as you would expect, is full of monsters. So, as well as some awesome makeup on the actors, looking at Miss Shuna Sassy all covered in her porcupine quills. There's some very slimy, lumpy creatures being animated all over the shop. My favorite is this little sickly dying beast that one of the kid monsters, Babette, becomes when she goes out in the sun for too long. This is exactly how I see my cat. Actually, that's kind of crazy that they captured her spirit so well here. A kind of different take on puppetry in horror movies is Chopping Mall 1986. It's a slasher film where a group of youngins get trapped in a mall overnight and are being hunted down and killed by these little mall security robot guys. They had a teeny tiny budget working on this film, so they really just cobbled these robots together with whatever random shit they could get their hands on. So bits of old conveyor belts and junk and bits of wheelchair I believe they use, and they are remote controlled so that they can zoom after people, they can move their arms a little bit, move their little faces a little bit. One of my favorite horror movie puppets is the Creep himself from Creepshow, designed by Patrick Louis, who they called Raoul on set for some reason. Yeah, he is a massive human-sized puppet. This guy is the size of a guy. He had little custom mounts welded to him so he'd stay upright, mechanical controls on the back of his arms so he can wiggle about. Creepshow in general has lots of creatures, lots of little creepy crawlies, if you will, including the literal creepy crawlies from They're Creeping Up on You, all the cockroaches used in that segment. So the crew sent some entomologists to Trinidad, a cave in Trinidad, where they just literally scraped up a bunch of roaches and took them back to set so that they didn't have to, you know, pay for them. Only it quickly became clear to director George Romero that the roaches were near impossible to work with. Namely, they really don't like light, so naturally they kept squirming away every time the camera would roll. For that reason, most of the bugs you actually see on screen are actually nuts and raisins used as little stand-ins. Creepshow's most iconic puppet is arguably Fluffy, designed by arguably the king of practical effects, Tom Savini. Fluffy is a crate-dwelling, wolf-adjacent beast that Hal Holbrook tries to use to kill his bitch wife. She's such a bitch, guys. She's always talking and laughing and shit. I believe there was a guy in a suit as well. Like there was a costume with a rubber mask version of Fluffy, but either way, he's an awesome little fella. Love to see him. I'm gonna go ahead and say the most stunning blend of costuming and makeup and old school puppetry is most certainly in David Cronenberg's The Fly. This is one of my all-time favorite movies. There's a poster behind me, but so this could be biased, but it did win an Oscar for Best Makeup, and when you appreciate how hard it is for horror movies to get the barest little crumb, little morsel from the Academy, you can see that saying something. The Fly is about your 1986-ified Dr. Frankenstein, Dr. Seth Brundle, played by Jeff Goldblum, who invents this contraption called a telepod, intended to obviously teleport people. Only when testing out his own invention, a pesky fly had been in the telepod with him, and their DNA is now fused, meaning he's destined to transform into a fly. Chris Wallace and Stephen Dupuis were the leaders of this special effects team, but it ended up needing 30+ crew members to help with it in the end. They start by just layering up more and more rashy, blotchy makeup on Jeff Goldblum's face, then adding in prosthetics that took 4 hours to apply, before finally swapping him out in his final stage of transformation for an animatronic puppet fully equipped with hydraulics and cable systems, and it took 8 crew members to operate. There is also the little maggot baby puppet seen in the nightmare sequence where Brundle's pregnant ex-lover Veronica dreams she's giving birth to his fly Spawn. I could never forget about her. It's not only puppets and animatronics, however, who are behind the iconic beasties of horror movies. I absolutely sorry, I'm kneeling. But I absolutely love the 80s version of The Blob, directed by Chuck Russell, where the main antagonist of the film is a huge gelatinous blob that goes around absorbing people into its slimy mass. In the original 50s iteration of The Blob, I believe just good old-fashioned balloons filled with red corn syrup were used, but the 88 version had what they referred to on set as the blob quilt. Megan Navarro at Bloody Disgusting details that this was layers of silk sewn together with pockets and injected with methyl cellulose, a food stabilizer and thickener used in things like veggie meat or gravy. The methyl cellulose would ooze through the silk framework, hiding it completely as puppeteers manipulated what appeared to be a fluid blob with precision. At one point, after the blob shockingly consumes the character of Paul, we can see Paul's disembodied face sliding around in the blob goo, which is a model designed with eyes that would mechanically roll back to look like he's screaming and dying in there. Furthermore, a lot can just be said for a great suit, a great costume. So many movies use CGI for that actual big baddie, their monster, and those are fine. If you like those, that's fine, but for me it just deepens my appreciation of those classic like a guy in a suit flicks that took so much attention to detail and care and choreography. The Howling had Rob Bottin doing its effects.
Hello, I am now realizing that the surname is pronounced Bottin, so it's Rob Bottin, which I've seen videos of people introducing him as Rob Bottin. I don't know why I was bottin pilled in this video, but yeah, please ignore my stupid ass. It's pronounced Bottin.
Who is another king of practical effects. His work on The Thing specifically is renowned. I'll talk a little bit more about his work here in The Howling in further categories, but right now I just want to share my appreciation for how good the werewolf suits look. They look so awesome, so satisfyingly real, and there's a bunch of them. And I remember that was like my main takeaway when I first watched this movie. I was so pleased with how great these final wolves look. Silver Bullet 1985 also has some excellent wolf suit action. It has one of my favorite wolfy scenes ever with the church full of wolves at the end. These guys had leather operated masks that could bear fangs and wag tongues. No, I'm not gonna do that. The Cellar Dweller from Cellar Dweller 1988 also looks really fun. Pumpkinhead from Pumpkinhead 1988. Some freaky extra leg extensions on this guy to make him gargantuan. To save money, he was also played by Tom Woodruff Jr., one of the creative leads on the effects team, and he was actually physically glued into the suit for the entirety of this. Oh, just while I think of it, Night of the Creeps is one of my most precious scary movies as well. Chris and JC, best on-screen couple, best on-screen chemistry, if you know, you know. The whole special effects team for this production all played their own monsters, their own creeps, if you will, to save on funds. It's where a bunch of frat boys at college are infected with alien brain slugs and kind of zombified by them. The team played all the frat guys. They did their own head and shoulder cast and stuff to make their zombie dummies with the titular creep slugs bursting out of. Hey, this is not an ad. This is not an ad, okay? I wish this was an ad if you wanna. If anything, this is a cry for help. My next video I'm making is about music that is inexplicably scary to listen to. You know, songs that you listened to as a kid and they really freaked you out. You really wanted to turn them off every time they came on and you didn't know why. Or songs that are just straight up made to be horrifying from like horror soundtracks and stuff. Anything that feels awful to listen to, I'm making a video about it. And I am rather curious, my beloved Catzilla viewers, do you have any music that scares the shit out of you? Please comment below for my personal research. The next category I have distinguished is transformations and body horror before your very eyes type shit. You may be screaming at your screen right now.
Godzilla, you just spent ages talking to me about werewolves and hit movie The Fly. How is that not already transformation?
What I'm talking about here specifically is the transformations that happen rapidly, that would happen in one kind of take. Warping, melting bodies and limbs, people bursting out of other people, usually a kind of standout sequence in a horror movie. Back in the golden age, so like the 40s and 50s, filmmakers would usually use a technique for this kind of thing called lap dissolve, which is exactly how I think I made my shitty horror movies when I was like 11. That is absolutely not meant to diminish these incredible visionary movies in any way, by the way. Just a fun fact. And obviously I was doing it very, very badly in comparison. Lap dissolve is where the transformee actor would have to sit very still for hours on end and have makeup and prosthetics slowly applied to them little by little, taking shots on camera in between, so that at the end they could cut it all together into a smooth, gradual fade. George Wagner's 1941 The Wolfman and Gene Fowler Jr.'s 1958 I Was a Teenage Werewolf, they immediately come to mind. Fast forward to the latex revolution of the 80s, things got a little quicker and a little slimier, a little more visceral in the on-screen transformation department. I absolutely cannot talk about this and not talk about John Landis's An American Werewolf in London without being pelted with rocks. And God knows I would not want to. This film is one of the reasons I love movies. It's one of the reasons I love horror. And in my opinion, in the big 25, it still has not been topped. Obviously, this is a werewolf flick about two American college boys who have a run-in with a lycanthrope while backpacking across the moors in the UK, up north. Only one of the boys, David, survives the attack with a few scratches, which means he is now cursed to become the beast himself. This is another work of practical effects that was recognised by the Academy. Rick Baker won Best Makeup as well. The scene where David finally transforms into the werewolf under the full moon is so incredibly drawn out. It's about 3 minutes long, no holds barred, no grisly detail left unshown. It's a pretty much perfect showcase of all the good stuff I'm talking about throughout this whole video. It was super important for Rick Baker to have this shot in a fully lit room with no shadows or coy camera angles to hide behind. And he got super creative with his combo of techniques here. They had the lower half of David's real body locked down under the floor with fake legs on top, equipped with wire armatures and hydraulic joints so that they could mechanically elongate. The same was done with his arms and hands and even heads. Baker created several fully rubberized heads that fur could be punched through, which was then played in reverse in the actual film to simulate like instant growth. The heads also contained mechanical appliances and air bladders and such to make them wildly warped. This all took a week to film, doing little focused segments on each body part. So Rick Baker was originally going to work on The Howling, which I mentioned earlier around this time, but he ended up going for American Werewolf instead. It was that project that he left The Howling for. In his place for The Howling, he put forward his 21-year-old protege, Rob Bottin.
It's Bottin, guys, please. It's Bottin.
This ended up driving quite a wedge between these two kings because these movies are so frequently compared and they very much became competitors. They really pitched two kings against each other. And considering The Howling had a budget of $1 million in comparison to An American Werewolf's $10 million, I think it still does a really amazing job with a werewolf transformation scene. Again, Bottin really didn't want to rely on camera trickery. So similarly using air bladders under fake skin and animatronic prosthesis, stretching the foam latex into the shape of a snout. Plenty of other werewolf movies would follow in these guys' wolfy steps after that. For example, The Company of Wolves, 1985, with its iconic dog coming out of guy mouth. Now, Rob Bottin's horror legacy certainly does not end with The Howling. In fact, it was actually fresh off of that movie that he came to work on The Thing with John Carpenter. I know, those CGI bitches who say all CGI like shitty and dated hates to see The Thing coming, because this 1982 movie really does look flawless even now. It's about a shape-shifting alien entity that can pose as human beings, basically running through and terrifying a group of researchers on a lonely Antarctica outpost. So of course this had plenty of scope for many different gooey, equally disgusting Thing iterations, often exploding out of its victims and stuff. The iconic defibrillator scene, for example, where Dr. Copper is trying to restart geologist Norris's heart, only for his entire chest and midsection to open up and chomp Copper's arms off like a bear trap. And then for a fucked up spidery Norris Thing to gush out of the hole. Botten and his team made a full fiberglass dummy of Norris for this, going so far as to painstakingly recreate the little patterns of hair on his chest. And it was equipped with a hydraulic mechanism that snapped the torso's wound open and shut. Copper's chomped arms in the shot are replicas made of jello, gelatin blood tubes and dental wax for the bones. And they had double amputee Joe Caroni standing in for a shot of the aftermath. The Norris Thing is then a huge wire-operated marionette with a radio-controlled head dangled through a hidden hole in the ceiling. Bloody Disgusting says that the effects team utilized seemingly endless quantities of rubber foam latex, fiberglass, plastic, gelatin, creamed corn, mayonnaise, bubblegum, strawberry jam, and more. It really is a triumph. I do remember that Rob Botten was doing all this shit younger than me. When he finished working on this 14-month shoot, he instantly had to be hospitalized for like exhaustion and ulcers all over his body. Videodrome 1983 is another body horror masterpiece from my all-time favorite director, David Cronenberg. It's about Max, the head of a TV station called Civic TV that plays pretty much just pornography. Yeah, it's just porn. He comes across a mysterious show called Videodrome that starts subliminally giving him these crazy hallucinations and leads him on a strange, grotesque, psychosexual nightmare ride as he tries to get to the bottom of it. We've got breathing TV, TV with guts, TV with fleshy little finger. We've got the iconic James Woods stomach vagina. And so who should be at the scene of the body horror crime but Mr. Rick Baker? Yet again, he did the special effects for this. There's the prosthetic stomach slit acting as a human VCR slot that Max puts tapes in, for which the effects team could only use Betamax tapes, as they were all that would comfortably fit in it. There's also the TV screen that starts breathing, which was made out of like a rubbery dental dam material with the images the video is playing projected onto it from the inside. Baker then rigged it with a valved air compressor and a keyboard so that the team could get air to blow and make the screen pulse with the press of a key. This subgenre of like erotic body horror really lends itself so well to those super old school effects. Because of like, to avoid being too cringe and too demonetizable, it's gooiness, it's tactile fleshiness. I mean, James Woods literally described that TV as being a literally like a big breast that he was fondling on set all day. So, you know, practical is the way to go with this shit. And so naturally we arrive at the beauty that is Hellraiser 1987, directed by my beautiful wife, Clive Barker. Hellraiser is based on the novella, The Hellbound Heart. It's about a puzzle box that opens up a portal to a realm of pleasure and pain beyond all imagination, inhabited by these godlike creatures called Cenobites. Special effects artist Bob Keane and Clive Barker literally based the creature design for these guys off of the kinds of guys that Barker saw at the S&M clubs he frequented. And a lot of scenes ended up getting censorshiped for their gore and sexuality. There is a scene where Frank, who we met at the beginning of the story, who used the puzzle box and was whisked away for sexy Cenobite torture, is reborn into the mortal world via accidental blood sacrifice. We see the blood drip down under the floorboards to a kind of beating heart-like mass underneath, from which little by little Frank's mulchy, bloody corpse drips out and rebuilds itself. Keane filmed this part on a stage in South London, so they had a nice raised floor to work with puppets under. And the heart-like embryo is made of a condom, a piece of tubing, some glue, and some bits and pieces to pull the whole thing together and make it look like a real human organ, according to Heather Wixton's book, The Monster Squad. According to the crew, they used condoms and lube to make pretty much everything in this movie because it's cheap and it's nice and squishy and wet, and it stays wet. They were all super embarrassed apparently every time they had to go do a shop run to get some more supplies. They looked like they were stocking up for the mega orgy of the century every time. I feel a really clear illustration of the whole practical versus CGI debate is actually Hellraiser. It had a 2022 reboot directed by David Bruckner, and tonally and everything, this movie really should work, but it just doesn't have that gritty groundedness of the original. It's way too lean and clean, and the reason for that is certainly that this set was not covered in condom and lube monstrosities. It doesn't have that charm. So to go back, for Frank's actual birthing sequence, they used a big old puddle of methyl cellulose with 2 rigged up animatronic arm puppets sprouting out of it, operated under that handy fake floor. They then made their Frank body part models out of wax with bonus colored threads to look like veins and sinew, heated them all up so that they would melt, and filmed it in reverse, which is an effect I adore. I love a reverse melt sequence. Another all-time favorite melt of mine is from John Carpenter's Christine, when the titular Christine herself, a car, has been all smashed up and destroyed by the movie's main antagonists. Because Christine isn't just any Plymouth Fury and has a soul of her own, she starts to fix herself. Artist Roy Arbogast made a plastic paneled replica of the car with hydraulic pumps installed inside, which when compressed would bend and like suck in all the paneling. This was then filmed in reverse so that we can watch her go back to her pristine condition. It's so satisfying. A movie that is certainly just melty as fuck in general is Stuart Gordon's From Beyond, 1986. One of his many loose, uber campy Lovecraft adaptations. It centers on a scientist, Dr. Pretorius, who develops a machine called the Resonator, and that allows all people within range of it to see through different dimensions. The exposure, however, starts to cause mental and physical changes in the users. The effects crew brought this to life in various wonderfully weird ways. There's one scene showing that Dr. Crawford, played by my old pal Jeffrey Combs, has a super swollen pineal gland in his brain after having come into contact with some parallel universe beasties via the Resonator. It was really hard to get this effect without having to redo Combs' makeup every time they did a take, because the prosthetic would have to be applied under that. Artist John Nolan fashioned a junction box stuck inside a flexible band that was placed between Combs' bald cap and his bulgy forehead prosthetic, which allowed the little air bladders inside to be set off via joystick control. Another scene has a super mutated Dr. Pretorius peeling off his skin to show all the muscles and viscera inside, with long tentacly muscles unfurling from within. This was a combo of another nifty little mechanism hidden within a prosthetic where the muscles could be made to contract, and then there would be a quick cutaway and then back to Dr. Pretorius, who has now been swapped with a fully animatronic dummy with compressed air making his tentacles whip around wildly. Perhaps the gooeyest movie I can think of, and a great one for sure, is Society 1989. It's all about paranoia. It's about a teenage boy who is starting to suspect everyone around him, including his wealthy parents and his sister, are all in on some terrible conspiracy behind his back. We've all been there, babe. Turns out they actually are, though. The socially elite are all an alien species that loves a good human sacrifice followed by shunting. This thing where they all like morph and melt into each other for fun. It's a big alien orgy basically. It's a great late night watch. It's just all around brilliant. I really recommend this movie. Screaming Mad George did the special effects on this movie, and he was heavily inspired by like the artwork of Salvador Dali. He made giant puppets that were wriggled and wobbled through little holes in the floor and threw a bunch of food thickener gel at it all, and he himself was apparently too icked out by his own creation to go anywhere near it once it had been made. Lastly, I want to mention my favorite Nightmare on Elm Street movie. Yes, my favorite. Part 2, Freddy's Revenge. This one introduces the idea of Freddy Krueger kind of using a living being to help with his evil doing, to become pairing up with an accomplice. In this case, using extremely heterosexual, Kate Bush loving teenager Jesse. We get some very cool scenes of his Fredification from effects artist Kevin Yeager. In particular, one where Freddy bursts out of Jesse's stomach. A fake stomach made of smooth-on was used with a cast of Robert Englund's crooged up head being pushed through it. There's a really cool scene like to show the symbiosis of Freddy's eye coming out through Jesse's throat, like kind of looking out through his mouth, which was done with a big old dummy of the actor Mark Patton, which one of the effects artist's girlfriends stood in and peeked out. She was like the only one on set that was small enough to fit in there. There's another scene where Freddy exposes some of his brain, and Kevin Yeager says in a Fangoria interview around the time that the movie came out that he wanted to make a puppet head but was told he had to use the actor. So he's got a whole air bladder rigged brain built on top of his head with crew members all crouched around his feet blowing up into the tubes connecting to the bladder. Really funny image. So my final category for practical effects is blood and guts, gore and gross. I originally wanted to do another one dedicated to pyrotechnics because the use of real fire instead of CGI fire is just always delicious and refreshing. Mainly I wanted an excuse to talk about the flaming car scene in Christie, which yes, there was actually a guy with an oxygen tank risking his life driving that thing. Alas, I kind of struggled a lot to find any detailed accounts of like flamey horror movie scenes while researching. So if there's any you can think of that like always kind of impressed you, let me know. Let me know right now. But yes, let's get gory. Have you ever watched a splattery horror movie and been like,
hey, they can't do that. They're killing people.
well, I'm here to put your mind at ease and let you know that it's not real. It's not real, it's practical effect. It's practical effects. The Terrifier movies are big on this. Their whole kind of existence is like an homage to those really grisly, video nasty B movies. Although they are getting a bit digital nowadays, which I mentioned before that Brain Dead or Dead Alive, I was introduced to it as Brain Dead, so I'm just going to refer to it as Brain Dead. That is nearly 2 hours of pure practical carnage. An article from Little White Lies talks about how the effects artist Richard Taylor made all kinds of models, typically made out of wax and other pliable materials, which were lovingly handcrafted just to be dispensed within an orgy of gore. The whole set of the movie, a house that gets overrun with zombies, was built several feet off the ground, so puppeteers could easily wield decapitated zombie heads and intestines with minds of their own. Boiled apple slices and golden syrup were used for the endless amounts of blood. All the actors were strapped with detachable prosthetic limbs fitted with exploding blood packs. I do believe we would not have Brain Dead, however, if it weren't for the Evil Dead movies, who kind of walked so she could run. Evil Dead is renowned for using so much fake blood, so much blood, which the cast and crew actually had to wash off their hands and themselves in an instant coffee machine because that was the only source of hot water in the whole cabin that they were filming in. They were so short on money and time in general while filming that first 1981 movie, effects artist Tom Sullivan was having to make people's prosthetics on their faces while they were literally laying still asleep in bed. Evil Dead 2 has a scene where blood is like spurting out of a wall onto Bruce Campbell, who is Ash, which artist Vern Hyde achieved with 8 110-gallon tanks full of fake blood, which was fired through 1.5-inch tubing by 2 gasoline-powered pumps. Apparently the force of the blood hitting Bruce Campbell was like that of a fire hose. The movie also has a flying eyeball gag, which is a painted ping pong ball attached to a small motor that spun it, which I just think is quite cool. Reanimator 1985, a Catzilla classic, is chock full of schlocky, fun gore gags. Producer Brian Yuzna described it as sort of shock sensibility of an Evil Dead with the production values of hopefully The Howling. It's about a mad scientist, med student, who concocts a reanimating serum that can bring the dead back to life. FX artist John Nolan studied lots of forensic pathology books to get the copious dead bodies in this movie looking just right, and his fellow artist Tony Dublin designed the headless torso carrying around David Gale's disembodied zombie head, allowing him to talk and search without needing a mechanical head. And this movie used 24 gallons of fake blood, just for reference. I spoke about the Blob earlier, specifically about Miss Blob herself and how she looked and how she was made, but so much of the beauty of this film lies in its kills and its gore. This film used miniatures a lot, making wax busts of his actors so their skin could appear to melt off while they were being sucked into the blob. There's the fantastic phone booth scene where the blob slops all over a phone booth and basically implodes the woman inside. That uses a miniature of that actress and air mortar guns to blow her socks off. Okay, I've rambled at you enough. I really love creative old horror movies with like a budget of £2 to their names. So thank you for listening to me break down some of my faves. Remember, these are obviously not all the great practical effects sequences out there. There are so many. These are just ones that I thought of, that I like, that I could find actual substantial information about the making of during my dramatic late night microfiche research. If you guessed that body horror transformations was my favorite category, you are correct. Love that shit. Eat it up. I eat it up. And do let me know which is your favorite too. If you want to subscribe so bad to use an animatronic practical effects puppet of you and animate you with a little cable to press subscribe. Bye!